The very first step when working on a 4L60 rebuild is to get a large, very clean work area. There's going to be transmission fluid everywhere and lots of small parts that are easy to lose. So make sure you've got a nice, large, clean space in your garage set aside for working on the transmission. Once the transmission is out of the vehicle, you're going to want to remove the cross member and transmission mount, the tail housing, the bell housing you can remove if you have a two-piece. I did not remove it in this walkthrough. The bell housing is secured with a special Torx improved bit. A regular Torx bit absolutely will not work, and I didn't find it to be any particular impediment to working on the transmission. Here is the rig that we've put together to work on the transmission. Fabricated some little brackets out of angle iron that sit on some jack stands and cinder blocks. It's definitely not pretty, but it gets the job done. And then we can orient it vertically for working on the input drum and so forth, and then orient it horizontally for working on the valve body. Like so. Next, you're going to remove the drain pan. Obviously, this is going to be real messy. There's going to be a lot of fluid that's going to come out here. I suggest having the transmission oriented vertically for this so that it'll all pour out in one direction into another pan that you have ready. Once you remove the drain pan, you'll be able to see pretty much everything on the valve body. There is the lockup solenoid here that will need to be removed. First, the wiring harness, the force motor here, the dipstick stop here, the manual valve and manual valve link here. Here we have removed the lockup solenoid and most of the wiring harness. We're ready to remove the wiring harness plug, and we have also disconnected the manual valve with the manual valve link. Removing the wiring harness plug connector can be kind of annoying sometimes. Some people recommend using a large socket to press in all the tabs there. The easiest way I found was just to use a large C-clamp to put a little bit of pressure on it, and then you just press in the tabs and it comes right out. Here we've removed that wiring harness connector as well as the accumulator, leaving just the valve body that needs to be removed. Here we've removed the valve body, and you can see the hold down plate here, the valve body side of the separator plate gasket, as well as the check balls, which we need to make very certain we have accounted for as soon as we remove that valve body. Here the separator plate as well as the case side of the separator plate gasket has been removed, which allows us to see the other accumulator, and next to it is the captive check ball on the case side. We want to make sure we don't lose that check ball either. Here's the box that I use to store all of the bolts for the valve body, and all I do is just kind of punch holes in this foam that corresponds to the holes in the valve body and the casing, so that the different valve or different bolts of different sizes and lengths can go exactly back where they came from. Here's what the valve body looks like once you get all that nasty old transmission fluid cleaned off. Here's a picture of the servo assembly. Now there is a little bit of a trick to getting this out. After removing the snap ring, the cover will be loose, but will still be held in by the O-ring. You'll need to use a pick to pull some of the O-ring out, cut it, then use a needle nose pliers to remove the O-ring. Once the O-ring's gone, the cover will come out and you'll have the whole servo assembly. I'm getting ready to remove the oil pump, and sometimes it can be tricky to get out. Once you remove the valve body and everything else from the case, you can easily access the pump, and you can actually insert a pry bar or screwdriver here and here to give you a little more room to work with, to get something to grab onto with a pair of vice grips or whatever other tools you have. Once you remove the pump, here's what you should see. Make sure to keep track of that plastic washer that's keyed to the pump. It's easy to lose. Once the anchor pin is removed, you can simply pull that input drum assembly right out. I'm removing the 2/4 band anchor pin, and the easiest way to do that is just with a simple magnet. If there's enough play, it should come right out, like so. And here's what that input drum assembly will look like once you've removed it from the case. There's two parts to that input drum assembly. There is the reverse drum, which comes right off the top and looks like this, leaving just the forward clutch assembly. Once that input drum assembly is removed, here's what you should see. There's the sun shell and the planetary gears inside of it, and then at the very center is a very small snap ring that can be very difficult to remove. Just make sure that you've got a good pair of snap ring pliers and a couple small picks. It's a great investment in the right tools here. Once you've removed that snap ring, you'll actually be able to remove the output shaft, the sun shell, and those planetaries, and you'll see the last clutch pack. Once that clutch pack is removed, you'll be down to the low reverse piston, and that is the entire drivetrain. At this point, you should have the entire transmission disassembled. Next, what you need to do is begin rebuilding each individual set of clutches. This process is fairly straightforward, and quite frankly, I've documented it very poorly. I have attached a link to a website that I found very helpful and exhaustively documents the process of rebuilding each individual clutch pack. Once you have rebuilt those clutch packs, you're ready to begin reassembling the transmission. The input drum has been installed, so has the band clamp. Now we just need to line up the band clamp and install the anchor like so. The input drum assembly has been completely installed, and the band clamp is installed along with the anchor pin, and we're now ready to install the oil pump. Make sure you don't forget this little plastic washer that is keyed to the bottom of the oil pump. We're just going to attach that with some trans gel, and then we'll turn it over and just install it like so along with the paper gasket. I was able to press the oil pump back into place using just a hammer and then a 2x4 to soften the blow. And now it's far enough in that the bolts can get just a couple threads on there, and I'm going to go around and tighten them just a little bit at a time like this to slowly press that pump back into place. All of the oil pump bolts have been tightened, and the main drive assembly is complete. We're now ready to install the valve body. I'll just flip this around. To a horizontal configuration to work on it easier. First, we need to install the separator plate and the valve body gaskets and replace these screens here and here. Of course, make sure everything is cleaned properly. If you have the correct gaskets and they're lined up properly, none of the holes should be covered up, and then you should properly see the V and C for the valve body and case sides of the gasket. We're ready to begin installing the separator plate, but first we want to check for the two captive check balls there that are on the case side of the separator plate, not the valve body side. The first one is here. That'll usually stay in place, and then the other one goes right here, and that will usually come out when you're doing a rebuild. So make sure you put that back in before installing the separator plate. Install the accumulator piston, rod, and spring. Here we have the separator plate and valve body gaskets installed. You just want to make sure that all the holes line up properly. Should be straightforward. And then install the hold down plate here and tighten these bolts to 96 inch-pounds. Then I've carefully laid out the 7 check balls where they correlate to the underside of the valve body. And some people will secure those check balls with Transgel, and that works fine too. I don't know, I just feel a little bit better knowing that they're exactly right here and they're not going to come loose. Now the valve body is set out on the case. We've attached the manual valve link to the manual valve, and then we're going to loosely install a couple bolts here and here to hold down the valve body while we begin attaching the wiring harness. This bolt is loosely threaded on, as well as this bolt, along with the dipstick stop right here. We've attached the wiring harness with the main connector here. We had to remove the force motor to do that. Then attach the connectors to the various solenoids, and next we need to install the lockup solenoid here. The force motor and the last remaining solenoid have been connected. Next, install the accumulator. Next, we've installed the detent tension spring. Now we can begin installing all of the remaining bolts in the valve body. We're going to start in the center and work our way outwards, starting with a very small amount of torque, just finger tight, then 50 inch-pounds, then all the way up to 96 inch-pounds. All of the valve body bolts have been tightened down. Everything has been installed. All we need to do is install the filter here, and we're ready to attach the drain pan. Now we're ready to install the servo assembly, and I have the entire assembly ready to go right here. And it's actually a little easier to install than it was to remove. You just insert it and put the cover over it, and then the snap ring. The servo cover has been installed along with the snap ring, and then we just got done installing the drain pan. Now all we need to do is install the tail housing, and we're ready to put it back on the back in the car. The tail housing has been installed, and we are now ready to install the transmission in the vehicle.
And here's the vehicle that my 4L60E is coming from, a 99 GMC Sierra with a 4.3 V6. It's always a good idea when rebuilding your 4L60E to flush out your transmission cooler. There's a lot of fluid in there. It's going to be old nasty transmission fluid that you don't want in your new pristine transmission.
The transmission is ready to reinstall, and make sure that you remove the torque converter so that you can get it lined up inside the transmission, and then just bolt it into the flywheel once the transmission is installed. And the transmission has been reinstalled. We have connected the bell housing bolts and this cross member with the sporting bushing, and then we just removed the jack sitting over there next to the wiener dog. Now we just need to install the drive shaft and all of the electrical connections, and we're ready to go.